Hey everyone, welcome to 10-Minute Mentorship brought to you by the Credit Union National Association. On this show, we talk to leaders about the extremely important topic of career development. My name is Antonio Neves. I'm a speaker, author, and coach, and most importantly, a proud credit union member. Before I introduce our guest, first I want to give a big shout out and thank you to our sponsor of the series, CUNA Mutual Group. We really appreciate them for all they do to keep the credit union industry thriving and moving boldly into the future. And now, without further ado, I'm so happy to have on this 10-minute mentorship, someone who really doesn't need an introduction. Welcome, Jim Nussle, President and CEO of CUNA. How you doing, Jim?
Doing great. Great to be with you again, Antonio.
Yeah, thank you for making time. So let's get straight into it. And the first question we like to start with, Jim, is this. Let's imagine you had to start your career all over beginning today. Based on what you've experienced in your extremely diverse career, not only as president, CEO of CUNA, of course, you've served in the Congress, you've worked in the White House. I think you've also been in rock and roll bands as well. But if you had to start beginning your career from scratch today, what's one of those key things that you would do?
Lean on others. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask someone to be your mentor and to give you advice and assistance along the way. So contacts. Who you know really does matter.
People sometimes are afraid to ask for that help, but also I realize that people are more than willing to help, but it is our responsibility to ask for that help, correct?
The best opening line, because people love to talk about themselves and love to talk about their own journey, is to just ask them, tell me about your journey. Tell me how you got here. Tell me how you were so successful. And 3 hours later, you may have to stop them because, but you'll learn a lot in that time in between, because you'll learn how they did it, what was unusual, who they leaned on, and maybe some of the tactics along the way that I'm sure will help build the tools in your toolbox.
Absolutely. Let's get to our next question. Jim, I'm curious, is there anything that you once believed to be true in building a career that you no longer believe to be true?
The title you get really doesn't matter. And I suppose that's easy when you become, like my current title is President and CEO, pretty fancy title. But really when it comes down to it, those two words, President and CEO, part of that, doesn't really describe what you do. I need to be the chief listener. I need to be the chief communicator. I need to be the chief team builder. I need to be the chief of accountability, of collaboration. And there's so many things that go into that the titles you get along the way, vice president of this or director of that, really are irrelevant. It's the skills you build along the way that are probably more important. So if I went for a next job, I would lean more on those things like chief communicator or chief of accountability or things like that, rather than to tell them I was the director of this or the vice president of that.
As you know, Jim, there are so many professionals, young and old, that at times they feel like they're overlooked for the work that they do, and they're not getting the recognition that they feel like they truly deserve. What would you say to that young man or that young woman that feels overlooked and they're not receiving the recognition that they crave?
I think we all need that recognition, and so searching for it in many different ways is probably a constructive thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think the most important person in your life in judging your performance and giving you recognition, frankly, is yourself. Mm-hmm. If you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror and you say, you know what, regardless of what everybody else thinks, I'm doing a great job. I'm killing it. I'm meeting my goals, my own personal goals. Forget the goals you get from a company. Are you meeting your goals? And setting your own personal goals, giving yourself both the ability to fail as well as the recognition when you succeed, is going to help you along the way. Now, that may sound like a cop-out, but I got to tell you, every time I've gotten into a recognition, it's fleeting, meaning, yeah, it might help you that afternoon. Certainly, it's good to get a little extra pay in your pay stub from a recognition, but even that is fleeting. Really, what's lasting is your own self-esteem that you gain from just doing a kick-butt job and meeting the goals you've set for yourself.
Yeah, it sounds like that's an agreement you have to make with yourself, how you choose to show up every single day to what's most important. Jim, there are a lot of leaders that are watching this that manage teams, and we all know there are ebbs and flows of teams. And for that manager who has a team who at one point was doing great work, but slowly but surely they've shifted to doing good work. I mean, not work that's going to get them in trouble or reprimanded, but they shifted from great to good. What would you recommend to them to help them to get that team doing that great work again and to get re-engaged if the team has found themselves maybe on cruise control or on autopilot?
Just this year, I felt we were really doing well going into, the GAC that you participate in. You're our illustrious MC and just do a fantastic job. And CUNA was doing just great coming in. We were humming on all cylinders, and so was the credit union movement. And as you know, the next day, the world started closing down as a result of COVID-19, and we had to completely change our strategic plan and our thought pattern about what goals were important and what we were aspiring to build as a team. So it can happen whether you want to or not. It can happen whether you observe that you need to revitalize your team, or it can happen overnight because of some outside force. And the way I would recommend doing it is think of it in terms of horizons. I've heard this given to me. So the first horizon is what you're doing today, what you need to do in order to just kind of get through that momentary, whatever it is. Maybe it's just revitalization. Maybe it's an emergency. Maybe it's a real risky situation that you're going through. The second one is what's around the corner. What's just around the corner that you're trying to get to, just to not only survive, but maybe to get back on track. And then the third one is the creative environment of what does the future need to be, and how can you challenge your team to something that's outside your comfort zone, or not just around the corner, and certainly not just what you're working on today. And you've got to do it together. If you're a team leader, you got to recognize that if I come in with a playbook and I just plop it on the table and I say, here it is, this is what I came up in my pea brain last night and figured out, I don't think it's going to work. The team has to be there to help you build it, to own it, to collaborate with you, to construct it. And if they do that, they'll be there to help you execute it and achieve it.
Yeah, those horizons are a great way to reframe those challenging times. So thank you for sharing that. And now our last question for you, Jim, which is a fun one to ask, but is there a mistake or something you've experienced over the course of your career or in your career that you've learned the most from?
So early on in my career, I was fired from a job by what at that time was my best friend. He went on and he was in my wedding. And the long and the short of it was I was doing a poor job. And he saw it, and he luckily had the guts to call me on it and say, you know what, you suck. And I was painting houses. So it's not as though it was a career ruiner, but I didn't like it. And I think being honest with yourself about those moments, good and bad, are really important. The second one is reaching for things because they're bright, shiny objects, as opposed to being willing to do the work, stick it out, grind it out, learn from it, get everything you can from it. And I definitely can be accused of being too ambitious, if that's the right way to say it, or that ambition of achievement was more important than doing the good job. And I've had moments if I'm being honest, where that achievement was more important to me in that moment than maybe doing a good job. And do a good job. That's going to last much longer than again that title or something you might have achieved. So those are two things. Trust me, I make mistakes every day. I've made probably 12 already today. So you're going to make a lot. You might as well learn from them.
Well, Jim, I'm just trying to, as we get ready to wrap up, I'm just trying to imagine you painting houses. But I appreciate you for sharing everything you did today, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us. Another thank you to CUNA Mutual Group for being the sponsor of 10-Minute Mentorship. And thank you, the viewer, for tuning in and watching this. And we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.